Okay, so here we are close to the end. Um, and we are going to look at solving factored polynomial equations, which just means it's already set up for you to solve. So the thing about polynomials, remember you have um, something with more than one term, is that you're going to have, or you could have more than one answer. And what you want is to have it in a form of something times something, whatever those somethings may be, equals 0. Okay? So it goes back to the property of 0. Um, if we call this A, right? And if A equals 0, then 0 times this, well, that's going to equal 0, right? Right. If we call this B, if this now is equal to 0, and we take this times this something, we still get 0 as our answer, right? So if we kind of put some numbers to it, if we say that this is 4 times 0, you know our answer is going to be 0. If we have 0 times 4, we also get 0. So what that means is when we have our something inside, that means we have a variable. And we want to find out what value would make that something become 0. Okay? So in a sense, if you have something already factored, you have it in multiplying stuff. Meaning like if you had something where it says x plus 2 times x minus 5 equals 0. So this is factored because it's in its factors. It's something times something. And it's then equal to 0. So what that means is that there's a value here that x can be, that if I put that in, it would make all this equal to 0. So we find out, well, okay, what value would make this group equal to 0? So once you have it factored like this, which in this case, in this setup we do, you separate your two factors, or how many factors you are. Right now we're just working with 2. You separate your two things and you set each one equal to 0 and you get your 2 answers. So in this case, if we think, well, what value can we add to 2 to make this become 0? So in a sense, we take this something and set it equal to 0. So we solve. So in order to get x by itself, we have to do we have to do minus 2 minus 2, so we get x equals negative 2. So that works for this one, right? If I put negative 2 in here, and since I have an x there, I'm going to still replace that with that negative 2. What's negative 2 plus 2? Well, you know that's 0. We do that, that's negative 7. But 0 times anything will still get us 0, right? So we know this value right here, one of our answers is going to be negative 2. But we also have something different here. So we set this apart, and we set that one equal to 0. So what number minus 5 gets us 0? Again, we can do that, and then, they get a little more messy. We'll have to solve this. So we know we're going to add 5, so we get x equals 5. So when I replace a 5 now for x, so 5 plus 2 is 7, but 5 minus 5 is 0. 7 times 0 is still 0. So we found our 2 answers. So because we have 2 different setups here. We have two different answers. So when you enter in your answers in the homework, if they're different, they'll have something like n or x or whatever the variable is. You just want to put in something like this. X equals -2, comma 5. Not too bad. And if they look a little bit different, it's still the same process. So if we have something that looks like this, again, they like to use lots of different letters. I'm just boring. I like to use X. So even though this isn't like a group of something, right, it's still a variable. It's still saying X times whatever this is equals 0. And this is something, right? We got to figure out what that is, times X also equals 0. So in this case, this is a little less work. When we separate these out, there's not much to do here. So we know this X has to equal 0. So boom, we're already done. And then we set up this one, set that equal to 0 and solve. So again, if it's nice and easy like the ones before, it's pretty, we can do that in our head. But here, we might end up with fractions, and that's okay. Fractions happen. So in order to get X by itself here, we have to divide by 11. So X equals this. So we're going to have two different answers. So our answers will be 0 and something like that. Same thing if it's like a 3x in front. Something like that. Since this is 3 times the variable, 3 times some unknown, because this has an x on it, we're going to set that up equal to 0. Always set this one up equal 0. So here, 0 divided by any non-zero number is still going to be 0 for our answer. Same thing like we did up there. We set this group equal to 0, and we use our magic of algebra to solve it. So we add 9 to both sides, and to get X by itself, we divide both sides by 10. And we have these two answers. Okay. And also you might get the same answer. So that happens when you have the same thing that's squared. So it might look something like this. Okay. So remember when we FOILed it out before when we were multiplying, this meant that we have X plus 5 times another X plus 5. So here, this is what that means. So squaring it makes, we're going to take the whole thing and multiply it by itself. So it's the same thing in each group, right? It's the same something. So in a sense, because it's the same, you really only have to worry about doing it once because, why repeat the same stuff? So here we have X equals -5. So homework-wise, I think you can just, if you have the same value, you can just enter it with just one in there as -5. You don't have to do -5, comma, -5. You can just do that. But if you have two different answers, you want to make sure you, get those two different answers. Okay? And yeah, I think that's about it. So the next one, we will talk about how to solve them when they're not factored. And it'll be fun and exciting.